Hello, I'm Thrace and welcome to my Thrace faction guide for Rome Total War. Today, very simply, we're going to be looking at the Thracian Units, the buildings available, and I'm going to be giving some tips on strategy on the campaign map. So first of all, here is Thrace. Now, as you can see, it is one of the supposedly non-playable factions, but you can unlock it using the editing the data files. There's plenty of tutorial videos to show you how to do that. But Thrace is in this region over here, just north of Macedon, or Macedon as the game calls it, in this time period. And it starts off with two settlements. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's an interesting faction because it's between sort of a Greek Hellenic style and a barbarian style as well. It's one of the more diverse factions. It sort of has elements of both the barbarian and the Hellenic factions to it, which I find is quite interesting about the Thrace, and it's sort of their unique selling point in many respects. But first of all, we're going to be having a look at the units, and then we'll evaluate from there. Alright, so this is the Thracian Units, and as you can see, there's not a huge amount of units available. As I'm saying that, what I mean is there's not a huge diversity of units. If you look at the Romans, they probably have like twice as many units. But Thrace, they still have some pretty decent folk available. So first of all, peasants is a bad example of decent folk, because these really are bad peasants. Like, even by peasant standards, 1 attack and 1 defense. I think that's terrible. But obviously these aren't used to fight. I just use them occasionally just to fill out the garrison, just so that people are happy. But very rarely are peasants useful in battle at all, if ever. But next up are Folksmen, and these are interesting units. I quite like the Folksmen. You can get them as mercenaries sometimes. Attack 13, defense 10 with a charge bonus of 5. And the defense 10 honestly is quite generous considering they're not wearing a shirt at all. So they haven't got any armour at all. So I'm surprised they've got a defense of 10, but they do, which is good I suppose. And they're good warriors. They're expert in hiding in woods, and they have a combat bonus in woods and snow, obviously. But they kind of seem like a more barbarian style unit in the sense that they may charge without orders. They're kind of disorderly, but they are good fighters. So yeah, this is an example of where there's sort of a more barbarian aspect to the Thracians. However, a more Hellenic example would be the Militia Hoplites, for example. So attack of 5 and defense of 8 is okay. Honestly, isn't great. Militia troops aren't the best. With poor morale as well. Yes, they can form a phalanx, which is good. Any unit can form a phalanx has some use in narrow streets, for example, but the fact they have poor morale as well, a cavalry charged aside and these guys are gone pretty much. So, and they're not wearing a shirt either. I don't think they are, which is very odd. But yeah, they're okay. But that's sort of an example of where Thrace is both barbarian and sort of Hellenic as well. So that could be an advantage in some respects. But next up is a step up from the Militia Hoplites, most certainly, and that is the Phalanx Pikemen. 8 attack, 13 defense, and a charge bonus of 3. Obviously they can form a phalanx as well, and they have a bonus fighting cavalry, which is common of phalanx troops indeed. Very long spears, which is sort of their unique selling point, is the fact that they have longer spears than other phalanx units, so they can reach them before they can be reached, which is an advantage in close combat, most certainly. Next up, Bastani. Now you can also get these as mercenaries in this kind of area, which is interesting. They have an attack of 14, defense of 6, and a charge bonus of 6, and they have 2 added hit points. They are experts at hiding in woods and a combat bonus, so they're similar to the Folksmen in that respect, but they have good morale, but they will also charge out orders possibly. But yeah, the good morale makes Bastani better than the Folksmen, and they have better stats as well comparatively. Well, less defense though, less defense. But these guys are decent, and they will do a good job, but yeah, they don't really stand up to arrow fire, let's say for example, because of their poor defense and basically no armor. But any troop with a good morale is good in my opinion. That's sort of a basis that I go on by. Now next up, Peltas. Peltas, I don't rate the Javelin Man that much, to be honest, in this game. They're okay. They are sort of short range missile troops. They have a missile attack of 6, but they aren't that good in melee at all. Only attack of 3 and defense of 4. And I find with Peltas they run out of the javelins very, very quickly, which is kind of frustrating in many sense, because once they run out of javelins, they cease to become useful. Basically, they're completely useless. But a bonus versus chariots and elephants is quite interesting. I don't really see why you'd be fighting that many elephants as Thrace, so Peltas I wouldn't really recommend. Instead, the archers are better. They have a slightly better missile attack, basically the same melee, but they are much longer range troops than the peltasts, and also their arrows are more numerous, they will last for longer than the peltast javelins, so they are more useful in a battle over a long time period in that sense. Next up are the Greek Cavalry, and this is basic cavalry troop, an attack of 6, defense of 8, nothing particularly special. They are Greek Cavalry, fast moving, so they're light cavalry, and they are armed with spears, which is interesting. I suppose these guys are good for rounding up troops also. You know, if you've won the battle when everyone's trying to flee, these are good just to mop up the troops. So that's what I'd recommend these guys for particularly. But, you know, they're okay. And then next up are the, of course, General's Bodyguard. This is the pre-Marian General's Bodyguard. Attack of 11, defense of 10. Good morale. They're sort of a buffed up version of the Greek Cavalry, basically. They look exactly the same. It's just they've got better stats, better morale, because obviously it's the General, so he's going to have a better unit. And then the post-Marian General's Armoured Bodyguard has basically the same attack, but much higher defense, coupled with good stamina as well. And I think they're better armoured as well, most certainly. So obviously the post-Marian General is going to be better than the pre-Marian General. That's a rule of thumb. And then Militia Cavalry. This, I would compare them to sort of Numidian Cavalry if you've played as a North African faction before. And they are not particularly good in the melee. That's not what they're for. They're missile troops. Their missile attack's only 6, but as they can skirmish quite well because they're light cavalry, well, they're missile cavalry, so that means they're light cavalry. They can move fast, basically. It means they can tire opponents out, and they can hit their opponents without being hit themselves. So yeah, they're relatively useful. In terms of siege equipment, it's literally just onagers. Very basic. They do the job against lower level cities. You might need a few if you're against huge stone walls. And then finally, Illyrian Mercenaries. Very similar to peltasts, but they look slightly better in the melee, and they have got a slightly higher missile attack as well, which is interesting. But they're sort of more buffed up versions of the peltasts, essentially. So now we've done that, we're going to be having a look at the introduction video that the Total War made. It's just a generic rebel video as far as I remember, but I'll show it to you anyway, and then we'll get onto the campaign map and look at the rest of the Thracian campaign.
The Greeks could rule the world. Alexander did. He took a Greek army to the far Indus. There was nothing left to conquer. The world was his. But Alexander is dead. His empire is gone. And so we live in evil days. The free men of Greece have turned on each other instead of their proper enemies, those who envy all that Greeks have done. Alexander must weep if the dead weep. I would weep in his place, but I would also hope. The world turns. What was may come again. The fates still spin the web of men's lives. So now, perhaps the gods wish Greeks to be great again. Perhaps a new Alexander will take up the sword. Bring order where there is chaos. Remake the world of men to a better plan. Perhaps.
Yes, that's interesting. It seemed to show the video maybe for the Greek cities or some sort of Hellenic video from what I could work out. So I don't know, it's not specific to Thrace, that's for sure, but they never made a video for Thrace because it's not meant to be a playable faction. But anyway, this is the Thracian starting point. Now I've taken the Fog of War off purely so we can see what is around us, because it's easier just to map everything out and show you where I would and wouldn't expand if you can see all the cities, but obviously I wouldn't play the game normally with the Fog of War turned off. So the Thracians start off with 2 cities here. Tylis, which is their capital, and inside Tylis we have a family member, 2 Militia Cavalry, Militia Hoplites, and 2 peltasts. So a sort of more militia type army, very light army in that respect. But it can do a job, most certainly, and I'll discuss where I'd move that army in a second. And up here, in the second Thracian town, we have the faction heir, Pytros, along with 1 Folksman, 1 Militia Hoplite, and 1 peltast. So I think I notice, and then also, an army here with the faction leader. I was looking for him, with 2 Folksmen, 2 Peltas, and a Militia Cavalry. It's a decent army to start off with. You know, there's not a huge amount of troops, but you've only got 2 cities, and you can also get some Thracian mercenaries if you really want to, but not a great value for money kind of thing. So where would I expand? Well, you know, looking at the factions around us, we have Scythia to the north, we'll discuss them in a second. We have Dacians to the west. We have the Macedonians and the Greeks down here. And then we have some rebel settlements along here. So, what would I do? Well, first of all, I wouldn't get into a war with the Scythians. And I'll tell you why, because the Scythians are annoying, basically. I mean, you could go straight for Campus City, right here. And it would take them ages to reinforce it, because they've basically got no one anywhere near. The nearest 2 settlements are so far away. So you could do that, but the Scythians are annoying. A lot of their troops are a missile cavalry, which is hard to attack because you can never get to them. And also, if you're going to conquer Scythia, it's a huge area, and you're not really getting a lot for it. So I wouldn't really recommend that. If anything, just form an alliance with the Scythians maybe, and then hopefully they would go and attack maybe the Parthians or expand into the Middle East, although that is rare for them to do, admittedly. The weakest faction by sure, is the Dacians, which have 2 settlements, Prolissum and Campus Laziges. I don't know the pronunciation. And these guys are weak. I've played a campaign as the Dacians before on my own, and it's a relatively difficult starting campaign. So these guys are definitely the weakest. Prolissum only has 4 garrison, and Campus only has 4 as well, and they'll have an army around here somewhere. Here it is, Siles, which is a decent sized army, but you can almost just bypass it, to be honest, by going through this mountain range if you wanted to. So what I would do, well, and then also, the Macedonians and Greeks. Now, I would just leave Macedon and Greece to it, in all honesty, and I'll tell you why. Because these two will possibly try and annihilate each other, and then the Brutii will come along and they'll annihilate all of them. There's no point getting into a war with Macedon, really, because the Brutii are going to come in anyway and destroy them. Obviously, you need to stop the Brutii expanding too far, because they'll expand north. So it's a difficult situation. You could just go straight for Macedon and try and hold out against the Brutii in this kind of area, or you could let these 3 try and annihilate each other and then pick up the pieces and storm through. It depends how confident you are with the game, essentially. But definitely don't let the Brutii get too strong, because if they take all these settlements, you're screwed, because they'll expand north, provided they aren't really desperate to go into the Middle East, and then it's going to be difficult to hold out against the Brutii when you're the Thracians, I would argue. But first of all, I would go for the Dacians, just because they're annoying. Get them out of the way. It's another potential enemy out of the way, and it's 2 easy settlements to get. So you've got a decent sized army here, which you can pick up a few mercenaries or train some lads, get them over to Prolissum and Campus Laziges. Within the first sort of 5-ish turns, you could have these 2. 5-7 turns, you could have these 2 settlements, and then Dacia won't be a problem. Alliance with the Scythians, you're fine, and then at which point you can focus on going south. But I would get the Dacians out of the way. There are a couple of nice rebel settlements like Aquincum. That's probably quite an easy one to get, but I wouldn't expand too much in this direction. Leave the Germanians to get into war with the British and the Gauls, and the Julii eventually. I wouldn't go into war with the Germanians, because they're quite annoying as well in some respect. Instead, focus on these 2, and then assault the south. A nice settlement to get early on, which the Thracians generally do, as the AI, is Byzantium. It's only got 3 garrison in it, so that would be a logical starting point for your faction leader to go to. And Byzantium would be nice. I wouldn't go for Nicomedia though, even though it's rebel. Let the Pontic forces have that, because you don't want a war with Dacia and then Macedon and the Middle East. It's spreading your troops out way too much, especially as you'll need to focus on this kind of area, because the Brutii are going to be hard to deal with. Trying to deal with the Brutii on this flank, and God knows what else on this flank, the Greeks or the Pontic forces, it's going to be too much. Plus potentially having a war up here somewhere, it's going to be too much for you to deal with. You have limited resources, so focus on expanding south rather than east once you're Dacia, once you've defeated Dacia. And also, this land is more profitable. The Middle East is very profitable, I will admit. Turkey is a rich land, but so is this area. And, Athens, Corinth, Sparta, they're great settlements to have. So if you could get these relatively early on by storming south, then that would probably be a logical thing to do. So finally, we're going to have a look at the buildings available. If I click the right button. So, the buildings available. Settlement details. Yeah, building browser. And yeah, as I say, the Thracian campaign is interesting because they have barbarian sort of buildings, but they also have Hellenic buildings. It's good because they can get up to the epic stone wall, which is nice. And they can get, you know, the nice barracks and the high level traders. I think it's level 5 traders, which is nice as well, and the smiths and all that. But we will have a look at the temples. Now there's only 2 routes you can go down. Another nice thing, by the way, is an Odeon, which increases the public order bonus due to happiness. You can go up to a theatre, which is nice as well. But anyway, the temples. There's Ares and Dionysus. The Pantheon of Ares, which is the highest levels, the 5th level. Public order bonus of 35%, which is quite high, but plus 4 morale bonus to troops. That is mad in my opinion. You know, a Pantheon of Ares, although it's difficult to get, is really good. You start getting the morale bonus at the temple. So I would go Ares if you're trying to mobilise an army in that kind of area where you want to build it. As for Dionysus, the Pantheon to Dionysus has population growth bonus and a public order bonus. So it's more for the happiness and the population growth. So it sort of depends. If you want a more maybe trading settlement that you want to grow quickly, Dionysus would be optimal. If you want somewhere that's going to mobilise an army and you really want good morale with those troops, then Ares is a great one to go with. But I think that's all, to be honest, to say about the Thracians. It's a very interesting campaign because you're right in the middle of the map, which is an odd starting point, and you have to deal with the Romans and all these other factions, and it's a nice diverse army and buildings and campaign really that the Thracians have. It's a good fun campaign. So that's going to be all for today. Keep a watch out for my other videos. There'll be various other faction guides, mercenary challenge, and the Scythia campaign might be out. It might not be out. It depends on I decide to upload this video, but it will be coming very soon if it's not quite out yet. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you very, very soon. See you around.